Okay, so this is the week 13 lecture. This is kind of a pretty short lecture just on different perspectives, focusing on neurological perspectives as we get ready for our last simulation on Thursday. A lot of stuff coming up and kind of in the works here. For the other half of the class, for those who haven't done it yet, you have to do the homework, the simulation 4 homework, which is again just reading a story, reflecting on it. It's due before the sim Thursday. I think it's due Wednesday night, so it's prep for the sim. The last simulation, like I said, is Thursday. The assistive tech projects, we'll talk about those in a second. Don't forget the capstone project needs to be finished, submitted by 4/29. The book report by 4/29, which is
Your hips have a lot to do with the low back.
a week from this Thursday. And then the final exam is 5/4, which is a Tuesday, that final exam week. Assistive Tech Project. Please look on Canvas. There's all these examples there. There's rubrics, there's videos, past examples, a lot of information there.
Thread the needle. Some people
Everybody's
do this.
PowerPoint presentation is due 4/27. Everybody. You're going to be going at different times. You'll be going on Tuesday or Thursday of next week. Posting the schedule. Posting it today. See the schedule for when you'll go. Some of you are going to do it via Zoom. Some of you are going to do it in person. The larger groups are going in person. Smaller groups are going via Zoom. I'm hoping you can do your show your project, your model of your device well through the video on Zoom. If you can't, you can just show us the device in the lab on Thursday. We'll have time to do that. See how that works. Things that are kind of due around the assistive tech. Peer review, just of the group process, how your group work together. That's due 4/27. Post that to Canvas. Model of your device is due the day you present. So it's Tuesday or Thursday of next week. Your oral presentation, again, that PowerPoint is due 4/27. You'll go different days next week. Peer review. You have to do peer reviews of everybody's project except your own that you watch, whether it's via Zoom or in person. If you look in Canvas, all the Zoom ones are already loaded, ready to go for due 4/29. They're all due 4/29, and the ones that are in person on Thursday in the lab, we'll just do those on a hard copy. Here's our learning questions for today. We're going to look at strokes, Parkinson's, ALS, patient perspectives. That empathy thing again for this week. Kind of summing up the class as we kind of roll towards the end here with the final exam. The reason I want you to not so much cry, but get emotionally involved in a lot of these stories and these documentaries and movies that you've watched, because it's a big part of what an OT is to feeling the emotions and understanding the perspective of our patients the best that we can. I think you guys are good at that. I'm seeing it in the papers. You're getting better and better at understanding where the patient's coming from. That emotion really connects with memory. Like the Gleason stuff, I never forget. Personally, I never forget the Gleason stuff because every time I watch it, it's just so emotional. I never forget what it's like for him and his family to kind of go through that. Again, an emotional thing, like what you learned this summer in your clinicals, you'll never forget versus us, all these classes which we kind of blur together. But the emotional stuff is what you remember. It's the bottom line.
This is easier.
As we've been saying, the best therapist is an emotional therapist. Compassionate, empathetic, caring, committed. Those are the best OTs. Those are the ones that the patients want as OTs. Client-centered, emotionally engaged versus detached indifference. That's what you want. That's what your patients want. And you want to be emotionally engaged. And that's kind of what the whole theme of the idea of the stories is, to get to think in emotional stories, to think in stories with your patients, think of them as a story versus just a list of problems to fix.
You should feel a good hurt, not a pain.
Okay, so the first perspective we're going to look at, there's a video of this. If you're just listening to this, you need to watch the video. It's very important. There'll be questions on this video. I think there's at least one question on the final exam related to the video, so you want to watch it. It's about strokes, CVA, and if you do rehab this summer, you'll probably be seeing a lot of strokes. There's 2 different kinds of strokes. Just kind of review. There's the bleed, which is an aneurysm, and there was an occlusion. Occlusion was where there's a clot, so the blood can't get the clot in the blood and the artery into the brain. And there's occlusion, the blood is blocked. Blood doesn't get to the part of the brain cell where it needs to. The cells die, the brain cells die, there's the damage. The bleed, there's like a burst in the vessel. It bleeds, literally bleeds through the brain. So that blood pours into the brain, damages and kills brain cells. Bottom line with both of them, they damage and kill brain cells, which affects people in different ways. Most obviously in their movement, opposite side, right side, left side of their body, their arm and their leg. Also their brain. And this woman that's going to talk about what it was like for her to have this aneurysm is going to talk about what it was like, how it affects the brain. The brain is very complicated. We're just starting to understand the brain. These strokes kind of give some insight into what is actually going on in the brain. So this woman, Jill Bolt-Taylor, she is a neuroscientist, and she experienced a bleed in her brain, a left hemispheric aneurysm. And she describes what happens in this video, and it gets a little funky at times, but mostly it's very, very insightful as to what it's like to have a stroke. Nobody really wants to experience a stroke, but as a therapist, it's good to know really what it's like, what the person is going through, the recovery, all that sort of stuff. And your voice in your head, I mean, everybody has a voice in your head. It's not that you're crazy or not, but you kind of talk to yourself. And it's something that's created by your brain. It's all created by your brain. And she talks about how when she had this aneurysm, she lost the voice in her head. And just her body was just all movement sense. The voice is always telling you what to do and what not to do was gone, in a sense. And she found that, in a sense, kind of liberating. But it's just insightful of this voice. Again, it's a creation of her brain. And she lost that with the stroke. She lost her sense of her boundaries, of her body awareness. It seems like such a hard thing to kind of grasp, kind of where your hand ends and whatever is beyond it begins. Again, that's a creation of the brain. She lost that. She couldn't read, write, talk, or walk. She lost her all sense of orientation to time, insight. She could not call 911, even though part of her knew she had to call 911. And she had this sense of peace, this lost sense of separation between me and you, kind of so to speak, that again is a kind of a creation of the brain.
Always turn around and check your back toes. You want those straight back. Heel up.
She has some tips in her book, which I would recommend about this. Tips for therapists, tips for caregivers about how to deal with somebody that's had a stroke. In terms of communication, making eye contact, coming close, speaking slowly, pronouncing words clearly, not raising your voice. You always think if they can't hear me, I'm going to raise my voice. But it's a stroke, I probably would think the opposite. Lowering the pitch of your voice, speaking slower, slowing your energy down. We talk about this with dementia patients, but patients pick up on your energy, especially if they're very impaired, very vulnerable. Putting aside productivity, all that rush that's part of being a therapist. She was very particular about not speaking about her in front of her. So like commonly you'll be in there with a PT or something, you'll start talking about, well, she did really good with such and such today, and she's right there. I mean, include in the conversation or ask permission to kind of recount their history to others. Repeating. Get used to repeating as a therapist. It's always good to keep repeating. Older folks, someone that's neurologically impaired, tell them 3 or 4 times what you want them to do. Constant repetition. Respecting fatigue. This has been, when somebody has a stroke, their brain has been injured. It's like it's been punched or damaged. So they need time to heal. The brain needs time to heal. Think value in your sessions versus volume in terms of time and number of sessions. Introduced me to the world kinesthetically. I thought that's really interesting because she's kind of lost, with this kind of stroke, she lost her sense of language, understanding language, expressing language. So by kinesthetically, If she's okay with the touch, touching her hand and moving her arm, touching in her legs, versus just telling her to lift your arm or do this sort of stuff. Showing kind of stuff. Teaching through demonstration, return demonstration, breaking everything down into small steps. Limiting external noise. That seems like a simple thing, but in the hospital environment, rehab environment, can get really distracting and noisy. Close the door, turn down off the TV. Simple, less words. That's Jill Bolt Taylor, her stroke of insight. Again, if you watch the video, it's incredible her talking about what it's like to experience a stroke. Another great example of what it's like to experience a stroke is that book, Left Neglected,
Slide down.
by Lisa Genova. She is a neuroscientist with these great books. They're fiction books, but they read like they're not fiction. Some of you had the chance to read that book. To me, it's the best description of what it's like to have left neglect, left hemiopsia.
So you can.
Again, to kind of review these terms, left hemiopsia is when you're not seeing the complete visual field on your left. Because of brain damage to the back of your brain, you're not seeing everything that's on your left. Left neglect, which commonly goes with hemiopsia, but is different, is you've lost awareness of the left side of your body. When Jill Bolt Taylor talked about the boundaries of your body, your sense of your body, sense of your arm, that it's your arm, and it's moving through space as you're bending and flexing it and all that, is again done by your brain. And if the brain is damaged, you may lose that sense that this left arm is your left arm. If you're going to give the example of it, a patient once who had left neglect, and she woke up in the middle of the night screaming, saying that she felt like there was somebody in bed, a stranger in her bed with her, but there wasn't a stranger. It was just her arm. She didn't know that it was her arm that was touching her. She lost sense of that. These images are really cool because it shows you with the left hemiopsia, it's something with that. They feel like they believe they're seeing everything there is to see, but they're not. They're just missing everything to the left. This is awful when they're running into the wall, which they will do. They need to turn their head to the left. If they turn their head to the left, they can scan and see, what's on the left. But again, if their brain is telling them everything's fine, we don't have a left anymore, and we're seeing everything there is to see, why would they turn their head? They have to be cued to turn their head. And the book talks about these disappearing and reappearing brownies as they go in and out of that visual field cut. When they ask somebody to draw a clock or a person, they just draw half of it, but they believe it's complete. That's what their brain is telling them. There's a great example of a cotton snow activity where the therapist as a therapist, you're trying to increase awareness in any way you can of this left side, and kind of stimulate the brain to kind of regenerate those cells the best you can, or get some plasticity going to get more awareness of his left side. So you're applying motion to the left side, doing anything you can to the left side. They did a thing where they put little pieces of cotton, they velcroed her to her left side, and they took a photograph so she could become aware, this is the left side kind of thing. The left side of her head was shaved. She didn't even realize it. I feel like I was watching somebody else's arms being bathed. Must be just a bizarre thing. And they would ask her, why don't you just turn your head to the left? And she would reply, because there is no left. And there isn't. And you have this neglect kind of thing. And then you have that lost insight, and this is all the falls and the kind of problems have.
We're going to take our left.
So it's a great example of a patient perspective of what it's like to have neglect and stroke. Moving on to Parkinson's disease, which is another common diagnosis, which you'll see a lot of in rehab if you do rehab long enough.
You can even kind of push this knee out.
So a ton of Parkinson's patients in rehab and home health over the years. Again, review what's going on with Parkinson's disease. It's impairment of movement, dopamine neurons. It's impaired dopamine pathway. This dopamine helps your body move, get these fluid kind of movements, and you're losing that. One of the medications they treat Parkinson's with is this levodopa. and it goes into the neurotransmitter here.
Seems a little
And gets
bit
and
easier
basically just
to
increases the amount of
relax
dopamine
than it does.
in your transmitters, so you can get that restore that movement. The derivative of that is Cinemat. You'll see it as Cinemat in the chart, but it's a derivative of levodopa, and it helps with movement. And it can be quite miraculous in terms of how it helps Parkinson's patients, but it's short-lived and it seems to wear off.
Ready,
It's
drop
very,
it
very tricky
back
med
down.
to
Cross your
manage in
right
terms of side effects,
all the way over.
but it can do great things in terms of movement. And there's peak effects.
Spread
It will
your
peak.
arms
I
open.
think I've talked about this before, but it needs to you need to think about that when you're doing your therapist. Are they peaking or are they crashing on the Cinemat? Other forms of treatment for Parkinson's, deep brain stimulation, that sort of stuff. Movement also helps a lot. Great example of what it's like to be Parkinson's.
Have your
This is
knees on top of
individual, and this a man by the name of Leonard. He had severe encephalitic Parkinsonism, post-encephalactic Parkinsonism from a disease. Again, it impaired the dopamine, impaired movement to an extreme. There's a movie that I highly recommend if you haven't seen called Awakenings. Awakenings with Robert Williams, Robert De Niro. True story based on these individuals that had this post-encephalitic Parkinson's disease, and they were basically frozen for 30 to 50 years. Their cognition was still intact, but they could not move their body very little or just very dysfunctionally. Leonard was one of these, a case example. He was a Harvard college student. I think he maybe graduated, and he just crashed on his Parkinsonism, severe Parkinsonism, and he was totally immobile just for years. And they were able to, they used with the levodopa through this movie, Awakenings, to see how the levodopa works on the Parkinson's-like symptoms. He was able to come to life briefly for like a summer. He was able to move again and to talk again. He was very articulate, very intelligent, and he talked about what it's like to have this severe form of Parkinson's disease. Talked about he was like caged in this body, trapped inside himself, prison without windows, no doors. He talked about every time he tried to move, it was like his body was kind of feeling, trying to do the opposite movement. I've heard Parkinson's patients talk about this. You ask them to kind of lean forward, to nose over toes, and they're pushing back the other way. It's almost like their body's fighting themselves. Had that full recovery, but it just didn't last. It had those terrible side effects. Great video, great movie to watch to get an idea what that was that. And you become stuck in everything. And this is something that happens to Parkinson's. In later stages, they become stuck.
We'll come down to the right side and look to the left.
Or frozen. They'll be walking along and then they just freeze right up and they won't be able to move at all. Same thing with their gaze, with their language, their thoughts. He even talked about his thoughts would get stuck and this being at war with themselves. And then his the L-dopa just did not work, and he just grew to hate the L-dopa, the Cinemat that you see today. How do you treat Parkinson's? We talked about that. Stem cells. Aerobic exercise is another cool thing that's been shown to be effective. Visual cueing, dual tasking, these sorts of things we'll get into. And rehab, and we'll talk about one of those in the fall, I believe.
Engage your core.
Our last kind of patient perspective is ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, this progressive awful disease that Gleason had with the documentary with the football player. You can see how it just damages the nerves and impacts the muscles and just kind of progresses throughout your whole body. Wherever there's nerves, ALS goes after.
And you're just going to rock.
I think there's a lot of lessons, important kind of themes to get at with the Gleason documentary. Going to be seeing a lot of the stuff on the final exam. Fits a lot of the course themes. Particular, what drives this decision to kind of continue living? A lot of Parkinson's, ALS patients, they reach the point where they're so disabled, they decide to come off the vent, to just kind of go to comfort care, and to kind of give up on living. Why do most ALS patients decide not to continue living? Kind of big question to ponder. Why did he do something differently? What could potentially change the decision of these folks that decide that they've had enough, kind of thing. Why did Gleason focus his foundation on providing ALS patients with technology versus just a cure? I think he was making a statement of it. It still is, really. You can live with this disease. You can have a degree of quality of life, but it requires certain things. Definitely technology, definitely enough supports, financial, physical supports, to kind of maintain a life at home versus just living like a vegetable at a nursing home or something.
Everybody's favorite guys.
A lot of the lessons, again, from Gleason to me, and it ultimately is an uplifting movie. You know what it is. Most definitely depressing in a lot of ways.
Your shoulder blades again.
Kind of focusing on what you have versus what you've lost. The 3 stories of his life. The last story, a lot of tragedy, but again, a lot of positives to it with his son and his marriage and his cause. And he finds meaning in that cause and his family, kind of a growth, I think, to a degree, through adversity. Kind of a different legacy from that block punt versus one of resilience, quality of life under extreme adversity. Again, thinking about this theme of technology and support, especially technology, there's so much we can do with it now. Rethinking in terms of not only living and dying, but quality of life in the home. Other examples, this is the cool stuff that they're doing now where they're mapping the brain itself. So this man that can't move his arms, he can do thoughts. And thoughts can make things happen on the screen. I think they're going to get better and better at that. Augmenting movement, computers, smart homes, all this stuff. This is emerging. Okay, so lastly, kind of putting it all together in terms of the themes that we see in this class and ultimately solutions for a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. OT kind of solutions for sure. We talked about, severe mental illness, chronic neuro patients today, poverty, cultural alienation, older adult, those issues they're dealing with, isolation, that sort of thing. The healthcare system, very expensive, limited, especially with the folks that we're talking about, these chronically health issues, dealing with chronic health issues, kind of limited continuity of care, increased institutionalization, elderly and disabled, driving up costs, reducing quality of life, ineffective. Why is this? We talked about some of this, but kind of ineffective or limited use of technology to treat people in their homes. Unlike Gleason, that example, it's just not happening for the most part. Lack of real coordination between disciplines, medical errors, missed opportunities, just lack of truly empathic and client-centered kind of care. More use of expensive medications, test-focused care, burnout, detachment, all that sort of stuff. How can we kind of move from that? Again, think of Gleason. He's the great example. The human support, the technology, the meaning. He had all 3. He had the resources, the financial resources to get the human support. Not just his wife, but that PCA coming in, the technology. Think of something like Stephen Hawking as well, all that high tech to get that quality of life. And then meaning. It still needs to have a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. For Gleason, it was his cause, I believe, and his family and his son. For Stephen Hawking, is probably more his work. And it leads to juncture. Getting back to that. These are the kinds of things that we need kind of more of, and OT kind of needs to play a role in this to address all these issues that we saw in this class. Okay, so like I said, Thursday's lab, one last time for SIMS, the neurological simulations. Let me know if you have questions about the assignments or all this stuff that